For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople existed with the quiet confidence of something that believed it would never truly end. It had outlived emperors, religions, dynasties, and entire civilizations. While the world beyond its walls collapsed again and again into chaos, the city endured, watching history pass like a river beneath its towers. To live in Constantinople was to live inside continuity itself, a place where the Roman world never truly died, only transformed. Founded in the 4th century as a deliberate replacement for Rome, Constantinople was not merely another capital. It was an idea made of stone. Positioned between Europe and Asia, it controlled the movement of armies, trade, culture, and faith. Whoever held this city held the balance of the known world. Its walls, expanded and reinforced over centuries, became legendary. Triple-layered defenses, massive towers, deep moats, an engineering miracle that had resisted every serious attempt at conquest for generations. Arabs had failed. Persians had failed. Bulgars, Rus, and countless others had failed. Even when the Crusaders finally took the city in 1204, they did so through betrayal, not strength, leaving scars that never fully healed. That wound changed everything. The sack of Constantinople by fellow Christians shattered the empire from within. Trust dissolved. Wealth vanished. Authority fractured. What followed were centuries of decline masked by ceremony and memory. The Byzantine Empire continued to exist, but increasingly as an echo of itself, sustained by tradition rather than power. Territories were lost piece by piece. Provinces fell away. Enemies grew stronger, while Byzantium grew poorer, smaller, and more isolated. By the 15th century, Constantinople was no longer a city overflowing with life. Entire districts stood abandoned, reclaimed by weeds and silence. Fields existed inside the walls where markets and homes once stood. The population had dropped drastically from its ancient height. Churches that once overflowed with worshippers now echoed with emptiness. The city still looked impressive from a distance, but up close, it revealed decay, cracked stone, neglected defenses, and a people living among the ruins of their own past. Yet the walls remained, and as long as they stood, the illusion of survival endured. To the people of Constantinople, history itself seemed to favor them. They had survived worse. They always had. Prophecy, faith, and habit combined into a dangerous belief that the city was protected not only by stone, but by destiny. That God would not allow the last remnant of Rome to vanish. That somehow, at the final moment, salvation would arrive. Outside the walls, the world no longer shared that belief. To the east, the Ottoman Empire was rising with relentless momentum. Unlike previous enemies, the Ottomans were young, unified, and expanding rapidly. They had absorbed rivals, perfected their military system, and adapted to new technologies. They learned from failure. Each defeat became preparation for the next assault. Each generation pushed further than the last. Constantinople sat at the center of their ambition like an unfinished sentence. As long as the city stood, the Ottomans were incomplete. Their territory was divided. Their claim to imperial authority remained symbolic rather than absolute. The city mocked them simply by existing, a Christian capital surrounded by Muslim lands, an ancient empire refusing to die. For the Ottomans, Constantinople was not merely a prize. It was an obligation. At the center of this rising power stood Sultan Mehmed II. Young, intelligent, disciplined, and deeply conscious of history, Mehmed was obsessed with the idea of conquest. From an early age, he had been educated in warfare, theology, languages, and philosophy. He studied Alexander the Great and Roman emperors. He believed profoundly in destiny, and in his own role within it. To Mehmed, the fall of Constantinople was inevitable. The only question was who would accomplish it. Across the walls, inside the city that believed itself eternal, Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos ruled what remained of the Byzantine world. He was not incompetent, nor weak-willed. He was simply too late. He inherited an empire already reduced to its capital and a few scattered territories. His treasury was empty. His army was small. His people were exhausted by centuries of decline. Yet Constantine refused to abandon the city. He understood what its fall would mean, not just politically, but symbolically. The end of Constantinople would mark the true end of Rome, the collapse of a civilization that had shaped Europe, law, religion, and identity for more than a millennium. To surrender without a fight would be to erase history itself. So he prepared for a defense that logic said could not succeed. Messages were sent westward, begging for aid. Rome hesitated. Venice calculated. Genoa negotiated. Promises were made, but little arrived. Religious divisions poisoned cooperation. Old grudges outweighed survival. The city that had once commanded the loyalty of half the world now waited alone. Inside Constantinople, life continued under the weight of impending disaster. People worked, prayed, married, and buried their dead beneath the shadow of the walls. Some prepared to flee. Most stayed. Where could they go? This city was their world. Its fate was theirs. As winter faded into spring in 1453, the signs became impossible to ignore. Scouts reported massive troop movements. Engineers prepared fortifications outside the city. To the east, the Ottoman Empire was rising with relentless momentum. Unlike previous enemies, the Ottomans were young, unified, and expanding rapidly. They had absorbed rivals, perfected their military system, and adapted to new technologies. They learned from failure. Each defeat became preparation for the next assault. Each generation pushed further than the last. Cannons were being cast, weapons larger than anything seen before. Stone walls that had defeated ancient armies were about to face a new age of warfare. Still, the city waited. Not with confidence, but with habit. Because when a civilization has survived for so long, it becomes difficult to imagine a future without it. Decline feels temporary. Danger feels familiar. Warnings feel exaggerated. Constantinople had always endured. And that belief, more than any wall or weapon, would shape what came next. When the Ottoman army finally appeared before the walls of Constantinople in the spring of 1453, there was no moment of shock. Only confirmation. What the city had feared for years had arrived exactly as expected, heavy with inevitability. The land beyond the walls darkened with tents, soldiers, horses, artillery, and banners. The horizon itself seemed occupied by the will to conquer. The defenders counted their enemy and understood immediately what they faced. Tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers surrounded a city defended by barely a few thousand men. The imbalance was not simply numerical, it was structural. The Ottomans represented a modernizing military power, disciplined, centralized, and willing to adapt. Constantinople represented endurance, tradition, and walls built for a world that was already disappearing. The siege did not begin with an assault. It began with patience. Ottoman engineers studied the terrain. Artillery crews positioned cannons with deliberate care. Trenches were dug. Supply lines secured. Everything was methodical. This was not a raid or a gamble. It was an execution planned in advance. When the first cannon fired, it marked a moment no one inside the city could truly comprehend. The sound was deeper than thunder, a violent rupture that shook the earth itself. Stone that had stood for centuries cracked under the impact. Dust filled the air. Sections of wall crumbled, not completely, but enough to send a clear message: the rules had changed. The walls of Constantinople had been designed to resist ladders, rams, arrows, and siege towers. They were not built to withstand sustained artillery bombardment. Each impact weakened not only the stone, but the psychology of the defenders. What had once been permanent now appeared fragile. Still, the city resisted. Every day followed the same brutal rhythm. Ottoman cannons fired from dawn until nightfall. Defenders rushed to repair the damage under constant threat, filling breaches with rubble, wood, earth, and whatever material could be carried. At night, under torchlight and exhaustion, they worked silently, knowing the next day would undo everything. Assaults followed bombardments. Waves of Ottoman soldiers charged the walls, climbing ladders, filling moats with their bodies. Many died. Thousands, over the course of the siege. The walls ran dark with blood. For a time, this fed the illusion that resistance might succeed. The city had survived assaults before. It was surviving again. But survival was becoming increasingly hollow. Inside Constantinople, civilian life deteriorated rapidly. Food grew scarce. Prices rose beyond reach. Hunger crept into homes already weakened by years of poverty. Disease followed close behind, moving quietly through crowded shelters and abandoned neighborhoods. Bells rang constantly, sometimes for prayer, sometimes for death. The emperor remained visible, moving along the walls, encouraging defenders, sharing their danger. His presence mattered, but it could not change reality. There were no reinforcements coming. No great Western fleet appeared on the horizon. Europe debated while Constantinople bled. Religious division poisoned what little hope remained. The city had agreed to a controversial union between Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches in exchange for military aid. That aid never arrived. For many citizens, the union felt like a betrayal of faith without reward. Bitterness grew alongside fear. Meanwhile, Sultan Mehmed adapted. When Ottoman ships were blocked from entering the Golden Horn by a massive chain, he did not abandon the attempt. Instead, he ordered one of the most audacious maneuvers of the siege. Under cover of darkness, ships were dragged over land on greased logs, pulled across hills and launched behind the city's defenses. By morning, the defenders looked out and saw enemy sails where they should not exist. It was a moment of psychological collapse. The Golden Horn had been considered secure. Its loss meant the city was now surrounded on all sides. Naval bombardment began. Supplies could no longer move safely. Escape became impossible. From that moment on, hope changed form. It no longer meant victory. It meant delay. People spoke less of survival and more of endurance. If the city could hold out long enough, perhaps diplomacy would intervene. Perhaps the Ottomans would withdraw. Perhaps something unexpected would happen. Hope became vague, desperate, and increasingly disconnected from reality. Days passed. Then weeks. The walls weakened steadily. The defenders grew thinner, more exhausted. Each man filled multiple roles: soldier, builder, medic, mourner. Sleep became rare. Fear became constant. Yet still, Constantinople refused to fall. That refusal began to feel like defiance not of the Ottomans, but of history itself. By late May, the signs were unmistakable. Ottoman preparations intensified. Cannon fire increased. Assaults grew more aggressive. Something final was approaching. Inside the city, people understood it without needing to be told. Conversations quieted. Movements slowed. Prayers deepened. The siege had stripped Constantinople of illusion. All that remained was the final reckoning, and the question of how a civilization meets its end when escape is no longer possible. As May drew to an end, the siege of Constantinople entered its final phase not with sudden violence, but with a heavy, suffocating stillness. The city had grown accustomed to cannon fire, to death, to exhaustion. What unsettled its people now was the change in rhythm. The Ottomans were preparing for something decisive. Even without spies or signals, everyone inside the walls felt it. History itself seemed to be holding its breath. On May 28, 1453, the bombardment slowed. Then stopped. For the first time in weeks, the cannons fell silent. That silence carried more terror than noise ever had. It meant preparation. It meant certainty. It meant the end was no longer theoretical. Inside Constantinople, the final night unfolded slowly, painfully aware of itself. Churches filled beyond capacity. Candles flickered beneath ancient domes. People prayed not for victory, but for meaning. For forgiveness. For the safety of their souls. Enemies stood side by side. Political and religious divisions that had fractured the city for centuries dissolved under the weight of extinction. What remained was fear stripped of ideology. The Hagia Sophia became the center of this collective reckoning. Thousands gathered inside its vast interior, surrounded by mosaics that depicted a faith older than any living memory. Many believed the city would fall. Some believed a miracle would intervene at the final moment. Most no longer knew what to believe at all. Emperor Constantine XI moved through the city without ceremony. He removed the symbols of his rank, understanding that titles no longer mattered. He was no longer an emperor defending an empire. He was a man preparing to die with his city. Chroniclers would later record that he asked forgiveness from his people, not as a ruler, but as a fellow citizen bound to the same fate. Before dawn on May 29, the silence ended. Ottoman cannons resumed firing with relentless intensity. The walls, already weakened, began to give way. Entire sections collapsed under the sustained bombardment. Dust, smoke, and screams filled the air. Visibility vanished. Commands were lost in the chaos. Then came the assaults. Wave after wave of attackers surged forward. Irregular troops first, sent to exhaust the defenders. Many died. Their bodies filled trenches and breaches. Behind them came more disciplined soldiers, pushing deeper, climbing higher, forcing the defenders to fight without rest or relief. Finally, the Janissaries advanced. Elite, disciplined, relentless, they pressed against the crumbling defenses with precision. The defenders, exhausted and outnumbered, struggled to hold positions that no longer existed as walls, only as rubble. Somewhere in the confusion, a small gate, the Kirkoporta, was left open or forced open. Through it, Ottoman soldiers poured into the city. The fall of Constantinople did not happen all at once. It unfolded street by street, moment by moment, as order disintegrated. Fighting erupted within the city itself. Narrow streets turned into killing grounds. Fires broke out. Smoke choked the air. Civilians fled in every direction, carrying children, relics, fragments of their lives. Many were cut down where they ran. Others hid, knowing discovery meant death or enslavement. Defenders attempted to regroup, but coordination was impossible. The city's defenses had been designed to keep enemies out, not to fight them within. Every alley became a trap. Every intersection a gamble. Emperor Constantine XI was last seen charging into the fighting near the walls. He vanished into the chaos, indistinguishable from his soldiers. No reliable account records his death. His body was never conclusively identified. The final Roman emperor disappeared as his empire did, without ceremony, without closure. By mid-morning, organized resistance collapsed. Ottoman flags rose over the walls. Trumpets sounded. The city that had resisted for more than a millennium was broken. But the breaking of walls was only the beginning. What followed was not conquest in the modern sense. It was release. The structures that had restrained violence dissolved completely. Discipline vanished. The city was handed over to chaos. The fall of Constantinople marked the end of resistance, but not the end of suffering. That would come later. For now, the ancient capital of Rome was no longer a city. It was a battlefield filled with civilians. And history had crossed a line it could never step back from. When organized resistance ended in Constantinople, the violence did not. What followed was quieter in structure, but far more devastating in consequence. With the walls breached and command dissolved, the city was surrendered not to order, but to abandonment. For 3 days, Constantinople ceased to exist as a place governed by law, faith, or restraint. It became a space where power moved unchecked and human life lost its value. Ottoman soldiers poured through the streets in every direction. Some searched for wealth, tearing through homes, churches, and palaces. Others hunted people. Men were killed where they stood. Women and children were dragged away in chains. Families were broken apart in moments, never to be reunited. The screams that echoed through the city carried no distinction between soldier and civilian, guilty or innocent. Everyone was reduced to opportunity or obstacle. Many fled toward churches, believing sacred space might offer protection. It did not. The Hagia Sophia, the spiritual heart of Eastern Christianity, filled with thousands seeking refuge. When the doors were finally broken open, those inside were not spared. The ancient boundaries between sacred and profane collapsed as completely as the city's walls. Icons were shattered. Relics were seized. The building that had stood as a symbol of continuity for centuries was transformed through force into a monument of conquest. By the end of the third day, silence returned, not the silence of peace, but the silence of exhaustion. Fire smoldered. Bodies lay unburied in streets and homes. The city was emptied of much of its population, either killed or enslaved. What remained were the elderly, the sick, and those who had been too poor or invisible to claim. When Sultan Mehmed II finally entered Constantinople, he did not find a triumphant capital waiting for him. He found ruins. He found devastation. He found the consequences of victory unchecked. Order was restored not out of mercy, but necessity. An empire requires a city to rule, not a corpse. Mehmed claimed Constantinople as his new capital, renaming it Istanbul. He ordered reconstruction, repopulation, and administration. Mosques replaced churches. New structures rose beside ancient ruins. Life, eventually, returned. But it was not the same life. The continuity that had defined the city for more than 1,000 years had been severed. For the survivors, there was no celebration, no closure. Only memory. Those who lived through the fall carried it silently. Trauma had no language. Loss had no structure. Entire family lines vanished without record. Histories were interrupted mid-sentence. What had been normal one day became impossible the next. People adapted because they had to, not because they healed. Beyond the city, the consequences rippled outward. For Europe, the fall of Constantinople marked more than the loss of a city. It marked the definitive end of the Roman world. An empire that traced its identity back to Augustus, to law, to empire as civilization, ended not with abdication or treaty, but with annihilation. The medieval order, already weakened, finally collapsed under the weight of change. Scholars fled westward, carrying manuscripts, ideas, and knowledge preserved in Byzantium for centuries. Their arrival would help ignite the Renaissance, reshaping Europe intellectually even as it reeled politically. Trade routes shifted. Power balances changed. The Ottoman Empire emerged as a dominant force, altering relations between East and West for generations. Yet history rarely pauses to mourn. The fall of Constantinople became a date, a chapter, a lesson. Numbers replaced names. Strategy replaced suffering. What happened inside the city during those days was slowly compressed into abstraction. But abstraction does not erase truth. The fall of Constantinople stands as a reminder of how civilizations end, not suddenly, but through accumulation. Through neglect, division, denial, and the refusal to adapt until adaptation becomes impossible. It shows how belief in permanence can blind even the most experienced societies to their own fragility. The city believed in eternity. History did not. Remembering the fall of Constantinople is not about nostalgia for empires. It is about understanding collapse. About recognizing how easily continuity can be broken, and how quickly the unthinkable becomes inevitable. Because the most dangerous belief any civilization can hold is not arrogance. It is the belief that it has survived everything before, and therefore will survive everything that comes next.